Well, hopefully the next few years will get better, simply because the last 3 years have been so difficult for a lot of these people.
That's a good way to look.
The connector changed. It's not that's the horrible thing, is everyone's going to say, look, we changed the connector and it's all good now. If you're always seeing it broken, it's still going to be broken just with a different connector. It's not going to fix anything. It doesn't fix bad operation.
Hi and welcome everybody to Electrified Veronika. I'm your host Veronika, right? And today we are delving into the fascinating world of electric vehicle charging. So specifically, we'll be exploring the, for me, conceived chaos that surrounds charging standards, from CCS to CHAdeMO to Tesla's newly named National American Charging Standard. There's been quite a buzz around legacy automakers, some of whom are adopting the new standard in the US, while others are investing in entirely new charging infrastructure. So what does it really mean? And how does it compare to the situation in Europe? I'm here to shed some light on this by asking the right questions. And joining me today is Matt Hortop. Matt has worked in the EV battery and fuel cell industry since the 90s, so quite a long time. For legacy automakers such as General Motors, Opel, and Volkswagen, he was also the technical director of the electric powertrain at Rivian, and today he works at ABL as technical specialist for all things electrification. He lives in Michigan, so just across the lake from us. He drives electric and he has solar on his house. And I'm really, really glad that today we have him share his expertise and thoughts around EV charging, as he is also the chair of the SAE and SAE ISO committee in the area of electric vehicle charging. Welcome, Matt.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
We're doing well over here.
Perfect. So I'm very excited to talk about everything, and I would suggest we just dive right into it. So we all know there is more and more EVs on the road, and charging infrastructure is always a hot topic, and we're dealing a lot with big announcements. There is a variety of connectors and protocols out there, and I think it can be quite confusing. So can we just start by you walking us through the major charging standards?
Okay, so this is a big, it's hard to do just audibly too. If you were to take a map of the world and just lay it out there, and you can actually, people have done this, you can find it online. And you can color the areas. It's all by region. You can color certain areas by the different charging standards. So CCS1 that stands for the Combined Charging System, and that's here in North America. CCS2 is also the Combined Charging Standard. Everything about it's the same except the shape of the connector, and you can get three-phase power there. And that's very popular in Europe, or that's mandated in Europe, and the rest of the world outside Japan and China. And Japan they've built up the infrastructure around CHAdeMO, which is a DC-only charging method, where CCS stands for Combined Charging System. That's AC and DC. So you only need one connector on your car, but it connects to two different connectors out in the world. So you charge wherever. Where CHAdeMO is DC only, and next to it has to be it's actually a CCS1 or a J1772 like we have here in the United States. So that means you have a great big spot on your car, not a big door. You see that on the front of the Leaf, but that's been dying out here in North America. Even Nissan has moved on to CCS. And then China is its own thing. That's the GBT or CHAdeMO is coming online there. But that is, again, it's regional. So that means here in North America, and there's an asterisk here, and we'll get to that asterisk, but we only had CCS1. There was no confusion. CHAdeMO was going away. Tesla has their North American Charging Standard, which they renamed. They do have a lot of installations on this. And for whatever reason, a number of those automakers here have jumped on and said, no, we need to change that over. We need to change the connector.
Let me just summarize. For North America, we have CCS type 1, right?
Correct.
And then there is the Tesla connector, which is now renamed to NACS.
Yep.
So what is the main difference between these?
There is only one difference, and that is the shape of the plastic. That is it. NACS uses the exact same signaling that the J1772 does. In fact, they reference that standard, and they use the exact same digital communications as CCS1. So and even the pins that carry the high power, the high current, are almost exactly the same size. So they're capable of the same amount of current. They do the same communication processes, and they got all the same signaling. The only difference is the shape of that connector. And for whatever reason, that's where people want to switch to now.
Okay, and before we get into these details, just to understand a little bit better, you also mentioned J1772. Is this a substandard to CCS, or is it just compatible, or can you explain?
Just in North America alone, there are about 20 standards covering charging, and that's really just for CCS. One of them, 1772, talks about the shape of that connector and some of the basics of the signaling and the wiring. So many of those other charging standards are around communication, some wireless charging's in there as well, AC, DC, all these things. And it's just such a broad topic. There needs to be so much work going on.
Do we then have to distinguish between a charging standard and the connector type?
No. If the connector's there, the connector is to a standard. I guess I don't know exactly how to answer that question. If the connector fits, it works. How's that?
Yes. But what really is the charging standard? So what does it entail? I'm thinking of myself going to a charging provider like Electrify America. I see this box, I see a connector, I see a cable, I have my car. So what does a charging standard define?
So there's three reasons to have a standard. Like, standards are all sorts of competitors get together and work together and reveal little secrets and agree to do something someone else does, and a lot of compromise. But there's three reasons why you'd want to do that as a business. One is safety, right? So there are a lot of safety standards out there. There's a lot of that in part of these, in the charging standards, as well as other vehicle standards, and even right down to your laptop. The second reason to do standards is what we call like performance metrics. That would be something like fuel economy or range in terms of EV. That's a whole other topic to discuss. But the reason why competitors get together and work on this, is that they can all be certain that their competitors are comparing their vehicles the same as to me or to the next person or the next one. That it's a fair comparison out there. You can't just come in and say, I charge super fast, and there's really no measurement behind that. And that's actually, that right there is actually the committee I lead, is about charge rate. And that's another topic as well. The third reason, though, and that's where charging comes in, is interoperability. That's like your USB, USB, Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi stuff, Ethernet. That's all standardized so that everyone can build a tiny piece of a much larger system and compound on that. And so almost all the charging standards outside of like the performance one that I'm chairing is about interoperability and making certain not only does the connector fit, but over time, as we've learned more things, we've learned to make that more specific about the way the connector is specified. It's possible that someone reads it, plus or minus some tolerance, and they interpret it differently than someone else. And so you get two things that don't really work very well together. And so over time, those things have been refined over and over again as the standard is aged and matured.
Okay. I think it's a really, really broad topic. So can I ask one more time, if I go to a charging station, Electrify America, and I have a Ford vehicle, which right now has a CCS connector, and I plug in, what does the charging standard define?
So the 1772 is saying the shape of that connector going in. It's saying what all those pins are doing. It's giving you voltage ranges. It's telling how some resistors are set up so the car knows that you've plugged in, and the EVSE can now start communicating. Then if that's a EA, it's going to be a DC charger. So it tells you, now I'm going to switch over to digital communication. And that's where a couple other standards pick up on terms of how that signal gets sent, what signals are on there, what messages mean, that kind of stuff, to go back and forth and manage that, as well as the safety of the system.
Okay, I think we have a basic understanding now. Now there is a couple people in my audience that think or would say that a Tesla connector is better than a CCS connector. Can you explain a little bit the differences and what could be meant by this? Is this actually true or not?
So I would say it is not better in terms of current or power delivery. It's the same, exactly the same. We can talk about there are different people that have different tolerances for how hot they'll let that connector get. Different manufacturers may want that not to get very hot to the touch, and others are willing to let it go hotter. So there's some risk there. But I would say it is better in two regards. One is it only has 5 pins, not 7. So it's instead of being this big, it's this big on the side of the car. Okay, it's the designers in the auto industry are going to like that a lot. And the second point is it doesn't have the latch that the CCS1, particularly on the AC charging. We have that little latch. In fact, I know we have this little button often, call it yes. And it will in the wintertime collect water in the heat of the charging, melts the snow, water gets in, the charging stops, it freezes and locks to your car. That's the problem. We don't have that. We have that in CCS1. CCS2 does not have that. They use a different way of retaining the thing. So I would say yes, for those two reasons, it is a better connector. Yeah. But it hasn't also been rolled out to a whole lot of different organizations. There aren't that many manufacturers working with it yet. We haven't yet learned how people misread the spec yet. There's going to be some maturing of the connector.
For me, it is kind of surprising when I look at Europe, and you mentioned that already. We have one common connector standard, CCS Type 2. Why is there so many different charging connector standards in the US? How did this happen?
No one regulated it. No one mandated it. So it just became whoever, it just became the whoever could throw money at it more, right? California rules require to get ZEV credits, for example, you got to have a 1772 capability, and their new ones were saying CCS, but we'll see how those maybe change. But adapters bridge that gap.
When I was looking into this a little bit, I thought, okay, originally maybe we started out with only AC charging, and this would be, I also have one here. This would be this type of connector, which is the CHAdeMO standard. And then they added the fast charging capability by making the CCS connection, which is kind of compatible to this, but has 2 pins on the bottom. Now, then later, Tesla came into the game and they decided not to do this here, but do an entirely new connector. Why?
So those actually came about the same time. So this we were calling it the Yazaki at the time, for the Menikeys in Europe were being developed. There was another one that had this kind of hook in that would kind of snap down. And there were a couple other ones that were being used and tested and worked with. Tesla, the one thing Tesla really, really does well is they focused on the experience and the product, not so much on the tech, on the experience of the product. And they looked at it and they said, if no one can charge, no one's going to buy this car. And they didn't have time to wait for the standard to do its slow roll. And they just went. And that's where that came from. They didn't like the options that were on the table and they decided to cut their own way. And you can do that if you spend the money and the time. Yeah.
And now if we needed to rank the connectors, now I'm thinking, okay, in Europe, we have CCS Type 2. And you said because they don't have the latch there, this is kind of a better design than CCS1. So how does Tesla, NASC, CCS1 and CCS2 rank?
I don't know if there's a way. I don't think they're any different, really. I mean, you got those little things like the latch. If I had my pick, I would go with CCS2 for everywhere. Because I didn't have the little latch and you got the 3 pins, you can do a 3-phase out of it. And Tesla uses CCS2 in Europe as they're mandated to. And they also have a very seamless network over there. It's not the connector that makes we really have to, you see that a lot right now everyone's saying, oh, charging will get better because everyone will use the Tesla connector. It's not going to fix anything. It doesn't fix bad operations. It doesn't fix bad business. It doesn't fix bad maintenance. Now they just have to learn it with a different connector. They got to stock different, they got to tool up different connectors. That's all.
Yes, I'm very happy to talk about that more in a little bit. Before we do that and talk about, okay, this announcement that happened and what does it mean and what do you think about it? So what's your perspective on the current situation of EV charging in the US? How good is it at the moment in North America?
In the last 3 years, it's just taken off. I've been super happy with where stations are going in. They're great for me. I know if I'm plotting a route going south, I head through Indiana, it's kind of barren down that route. I have to kind of go around Indiana through Ohio or something like that. And it's spotty, right? It's spotty. It's growing. And this is why the Tesla supercharger network is so well done is they're investing in the future. They're not trying to make a profitable business right now. And that means just getting out there, being everywhere. And learning as everyone's learning very fast. Some are choosing to act on that learning. Some are just kind of, I guess, hoping the problems go away. It depends on the networks. It depends on all these. They're all individual and they're all picking different reasons for citing things somewhere and not other places. So I've been very happy though with the last 2 years. It's been a great increase in the ability not to even think about it anymore.
Yes. For me, it's kind of similar. So even here in the Midwest, I think it's quite okay right now. I mean, sometimes, so we are mainly using the Electrify America charging provider and services. Sometimes you see a couple units down. We'll talk about that later, why this could be. But overall, we never had really any really severe troubles. Now, you are the chair of SAE and SAE ISO, I think the co-chair for EV charging topics. Now, I would like to understand a little bit better, what is this about? What are you doing in these committees? Maybe also explain a little bit what is SAE for those that don't know.
So SAE is the Society of Automotive Engineers. We are the official standards body for automotive standards, and everyone in the industry follows a lot of these. I'm the chair of a task force in there. Also in the ISO side, ISO has, for the rest of the world, has a lot of for overall the world, there's a lot of standards there for ISO, and they have a lot of the charging standards. And we actually harmonize very closely so that the same parts can be built for cars in North America or Europe. And we try to keep those very close. They can't always be the same. Sometimes it's simply miles. Sometimes it's because we have different voltages. And sometimes it's more complicated because California has a law that we have to deal with or something like that. There's different regulatory issues. So the standard that I work on it's actually almost the same one on both sides. We try to keep them together. It's about charge rate. How fast does a vehicle charge? So when you look at advertising, you see all sorts of numbers. They give you percents and times and miles and minutes and all sorts of these things. And so what we've published so far is we're kind of at the draft level, and then we'll keep marching towards the standard.
Okay, that's very interesting. So who else is part of these committees? How do you get started there?
Technically, we're all volunteers. I mean, there's a disclaimer right at the beginning, a bunch of things about patents and other things, but disclaimers, we're all representing ourselves. We're representing our technical capabilities, and we're all volunteers. Now, a lot of us are actually working at a company, and this is part of our job, and we have access to information. And so that's what makes us be the experts needed to make these decisions, these discussions, or whatever. And so it is, you join SAE and then you join a committee, and then to become a voting member, you gotta actually be contributing either through editing or commenting or performing tests or whatever, something along those lines, to kind of earn the spot to vote on whether a standard or not can move forward or has to be changed.
And you mentioned that you're responsible kind of for EV charging rates. So what is the EV charging rate and how does this turn out in the future?
So like you said, you see 10 to 80% in 23 minutes or whatever, something along those lines. I don't know. Personally, I don't know what to do with those numbers. I've been doing this for 25 years. I don't know what to do with percent to percent in time when I'm comparing vehicles. So we've what we've built is a test procedure, which is the same. Everyone would follow the same test procedure, so the results would be comparable, and a metric that says it's what we're targeting here is how many miles do you put back in 10 minutes. So that gives you an idea of how useful the actual power that you're doing on the charging, not just how fast is your battery filled, but how much more use do I get out of the vehicle in 10 minutes.
But this would still be valid for only a certain range of the state of charge of the battery, because it kind of depends on that.
Correct. So we've the test procedure is set up so it's giving you it's giving you probably the fastest 10 minutes, the quickest 10 minutes, but in a way that it's everyone's quickest 10 minutes. So you can compare it that way a little bit cleanly, very cleanly.
What is the fastest charging EV today?
I believe the Lucid Air is number one. Just because, two reasons. One is it's a lot of power, and people look at it and say, this is a lot of power. But two, it's also very efficient. And that's the benefit of going with a miles added versus just an SOC. Because if you do on an SOC basis, they're actually slow. If you do like 10 to 80% with them, because they have such a big battery, they're actually slow. But by the time some of these other cars are done charging 80% to their 80%, the Lucid's already put in more miles, but it's got more to go till it gets to the SOC. And so that the SOC is very misleading.
Yes, I agree. And whenever we're somewhere on the road and people are asking us, how fast does it charge? It's really so hard to explain that even. And also, it's just such a different user experience to charge an EV. I mean, we rarely ever on a road trip would drive so long that we would run into lower than 5% SOC or anything like this. It's really more like stop and go and charge and on the fly. So it's just so different. So I think this is really great.
Yeah. So when I talk to people, I'll say my truck gets 60 miles in 10 minutes. That's what I tell them.
Yeah.
Miles in 10 minutes. And then that means something. Like that means something to you. Oh, I got to drive 200 miles. It's going to take me 3 hours or something, or 30 minutes or, that's not quite right, but it's, it at least does something up there. If on the other side, I told them what is on the window sticker, 14 hours, they're just going to zone out.
Yes.
I don't have time for that. And because that's 0 to 100%.
Absolutely. I would like to come back to the standards and those announcements that we had recently. So, for example, GM and Ford, they use CCS Type 1 today in the US, and they have announced to adopt towards the Tesla connector. So not only can a Ford EV owner like us charge at a Tesla charging station today with the appropriate adapter because Tesla opened up their network, but soon the future vehicles will really be produced with the Tesla charging port, if you will. So what did you think about this?
I just looked at it. Like I said, I think it's the same. I think the experience will be the same. I think the results will be the same. They're going to have to change some of their designs. They're really going to have to think about where they put that charge port, because if you've driven a Tesla and use a supercharger, especially on some of the older ones, the newer ones are getting longer cables, but it's still hard to back that car in right on that thing. And you have to be well parked. And if you're not a good parker, the other people let you know, because it's so important for everyone to park. So if you take your F-150 in there, you're probably going to block 2 spots.
Yeah, it will be very interesting. So I see a lot of people being extremely excited about it, but then there's also resistance. So it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think the resistance is, I know, in kind of my circles, it's what I'm saying. It's like, why I feel like we're going backwards, because now we have to have everything. All the suppliers have to retool and have to build new things, and we'll have to learn new failure modes and fix those as we grow over time. We'll get to great smooth charging here in 5 years instead of 3 years with CCS. But if this is what it takes to get people going, I'm a little concerned. It's also causing the confusion. It's adding confusion. It's adding to people saying, well, I'm not doing anything until they get this all worked out. So both of those things, I think, are actually setting us back with these standards. But How do you certain ships go certain directions? That's all I'm saying. Big ships.
Yes, very big ships. I wonder what happens to the existing charging stations. I come back to Electrify America because I'm so familiar with it. I mean, we have a truck that has a CCS Type 1 connector, and we drive it for more than a couple of years. So will they offer adapters there? Will they be changed? Will they be turned down? I have no idea. Like, what do you think happens to the existing ones?
I don't know. I know Rivian said they would make adapters available for people like me with the CCS connector still. But like I said, the difference really isn't that big. So it really could just be replacing the cable assembly. Right. The rest of that charging station is exactly the same. The communication, all the logic, everything else is exactly the same. So if you're used to it, if you're always seeing it broken, it's still going to be broken just with a different connector.
This is the next topic I wanted to talk about, the reliability of charging stations, and if this would affect reliability at all. Like if you look at the Tesla supercharging network, I have read that they are extremely reliable with an uptime of around 95%, and other networks have lower numbers, and the charging experience is not so good. I told you that sometimes when I go to Electrify America, like half of the chargers are down and things like this. First of all, I would like to discuss if you have any insights. Why are, for these third-party providers, sometimes a couple chargers down? And then I would like to discuss, do you think reliability will be different when we change connectors? But I can already...
my answer.
Yes.
Why are some down? So again, it's been a steep learning curve for a lot of these companies. Some of the problems we've been experiencing, some of the problems are just simply, overheating or poor maintenance or just failing parts, like designs that just weren't ruggedized for the outdoor or just couldn't handle certain temperatures or sun loads or whatever. And so a lot of those things have been being worked out. I think maintenance is, like I said that before, and I'll say it again, I think maintenance is a big one. There's a lot of network connectivity issues. Like if you try to pay for it and you can't authorize your credit card or something like that because the network's down. Charge points, very, very reliable. I've always found they have a concept, I think they call it fail functional. So if something like that, if the network's down, they're just going to let you charge because it's just easier and cheaper probably than staffing a helpline. I think you have plug and charge with EA, right? I on Rivian network, I have plug and charge as well. That's beautiful and smooth. I don't have to deal with all that sort of that IO or the apps. Some people have just terrible apps. It's just bad apps. There have been problems in the past. A lot of us have to have those little cards where you do the debit cards because that's the way to get around the fact that credit card transactions are getting, they'll get denied. The AI, they're using AI to detect fraud. And if you don't have enough information about how to detect fraud in these things, they get denied and you have no feedback. What's wrong? This isn't working. It's not authorized. So it is really, it does feel like a really big mess. It is a big mess. It is many, many, many small things kind of stacking up. But it is good. The last 3 years have been excellent in terms of what we've been learning and all the network operators, because a lot of this is operations. This is business. What's the business model look like? That I don't think anyone knows yet, but they're trying different things. So hopefully the next few years will get better simply because the last 3 years have been so difficult for a lot of these people. Yeah.
That's a good way to look.
The connector changed. It's not that's the horrible thing is everyone's going to say, look, we changed the connector and it's all good now.
Yes. Another question, I'm just thinking, if I take my Ford truck and go to a Tesla supercharging station, is there any difference for me between, do you think in the future, between using an adapter or having a new connector on my car?
No. It's quality of the adapter. And it's you get a cheap knockoff one, it might melt to your car. But other than that, yeah. You'll still have to deal with an app because you won't have plug and charge with Tesla. So you'll still have to authorize on an app. You still have to do all that stuff.
It would be very exciting. Now, something that was even more surprising, maybe, was this another recent announcement that GM, Honda, BMW, and I think a couple other automakers announced that they will build a network of more than 30,000 EV charging stations in the US. What is it about? Which connector will they be using? What does it mean?
I haven't seen anything talking about the connector, but if GM and Ford are there, they just said they're switching to NACS. So I'd assume it's going to be heavily NACS, if not completely. Who knows? The press announcements, all I've seen on this as well, or the discussion on it. Great, good. But my position on this is I'll wait to see what happens. I'll wait to see what turns up from this, because I've heard a lot of announcements in the past 10 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it looks like we're transitioning to one common EV charging standard in the US, which is not a global one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just the shape. It's just the shape.
Yes. Thank you so much for your insights. I would have a couple, like 3 or 4 more questions that came through my audience.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
All right.
We can see if you have some answers for us here too. So the first one was about the cost of EV charging, especially fast charging. Is there anything that you can share from your work with SAE? Are you talking about these things there? From my personal experience, I have observed Electrify America has been increasing their fast charging rates over the past years. How do you think this will evolve in the future? Is there anything that can be done to decrease fast charging costs?
I don't see that being in the standard space. That's all business and competitive and market driven and all that kind of stuff. I think it's a new business, and it's a new business model, and they need to figure this. It needs to get figured out. Is it always going to be a loss leader, like that announcement for all the car companies coming together? They said a lot of good things in there, that the places where they'll charge, they'll have bathrooms, they'll have maybe commercial, right, like in the middle of surrounded by a strip mall. But there's lots of strip malls now. You can just kind of site there. So how do you work that together with those to make money in other ways? That might be a way of doing it. I don't know. That's actually a really complicated one, but it's partly also on what kind of innovation people can come up with in the next few years to make the money.
I agree. Another question was about a standard that I had to look up, ISO 15118. It seems to be vehicle to grid communication. Are you involved in this? And the question was, when do they envision this standard becoming widely adopted?
So that's the ISO V2G thing. It's being worked out. There's some issues around, particularly around cybersecurity. It's got to get worked out because it needs to be in there. On the SAE side, because of demand here in the US, we moved ahead of them a little bit, and we put in together. It should be published here any day now, if not already. But the DC, the communication protocol for charging, had a new standard, some messages put in there, so everyone can use the same messages now and start doing V2G over CCS, and actually it would also work for NACS since they use the same communication standard.
Thank you. And then the final question, and I don't know anything about it, is what's the future of charging standards? 𝗟𝗲𝗿𝗿? What is it? 𝗟𝗲𝗿𝗿?
That's China. Yeah, it means nothing for us here, here or Europe. It's only within China.
Okay.
But that's the future of China.
That's the future of China. Okay. Thank you so much for helping us understand this topic a little bit better. I think it's still kind of confusing, and it's not very visible to me if what happens in the future. But I hope we could clarify a couple questions and misconceptions. Thank you so much.
All right. I want to just say this. It's like right now, if you go back 20 years ago with Bluetooth, it was a pain in the butt always to get Bluetooth to set up right? Connect, stay paired, whatever, you go out of range. That standard continued to evolve. The technology around it continued to evolve. And now, okay, it's not perfect, but it's much better. Same, we're like that right now, 20 years ago in Bluetooth with this charging standard. So we'll get there. It's going to come, but it takes this, we're in the middle of the messy period right now.
That's a great analogy. Thank you.